Walter or Wes, either of you have a comment on that, or what the Tea Party's been able to accomplish since the inception and a year and a half has gone by?
I can speak to that, I think. I think that one of the most important things, and I'm a very good example of this, is the fact that citizens are activated. They are watching. We are watching what our elected officials are doing. We're becoming involved. And I think that that is one of the most important things that may not have happened without all of, with everything else that's been going on. This activation, the everyday citizens stepping forward to do their part to help save the Republic.
Great. Walter?
Well, I think there are a couple different ways to look at it. The first Sue already spoke to, which was the evidence that there's definitely an effect upon the inertia of government that the Tea Party movement has had. And if you want to be pessimistic and cynical, which I tend to be, you can talk about how we've had healthcare passed, we've had financial reform passed, we've had stimuluses passed. It really doesn't seem like we've been able to stop legislation from getting through. However, as Sue points out, there's no question that the speed at which these things have been able to be accomplished has been slowed down. And when you're trying to stop a freight train, it takes some time. You have to keep applying that brake, and I think that's what the Tea Party movement is doing right now, currently. In the long run, I think as important as elections and getting people involved politically is trying to affect the culture. And I really do think that the Tea Party movement is affecting the culture, getting people interested in the philosophy of government again. If you go back and you take a look at the Founding Fathers, they spent a lot of time, and not just the Founding Fathers, but that generation. When the Declaration of Independence was written and it was dispensed to the people, they sat around in pubs over beers and talked about it. Talked about the Declaration, talked about the Constitution, talked about government, how they should be governed, both locally and at the state level, and how the federal government should be run. It was a topic of conversation that, unlike today, was socially acceptable. Today, you hear, what are the two things you don't talk about in polite conversation? Politics and religion. Well, that needs to change, because these are important issues which affect our fundamental day-to-day liberties. And if we don't start talking about them, we're going to continue to lose them. And I think that's the most important thing the Tea Party movement is doing.
Do you think that the reason that we don't talk about patriotic subjects or discuss things like that one-on-one is, and this is my opinion, that not enough people have skin in the game. Not enough people have a stake in the game. As compared to them back in the days of our Founding Fathers, they were fighting for their freedom, their liberty, and their separation from an oppressive government. Do you think it's now people are a little more comfortable or too comfortable to actually take the time to be involved?
Well, that's an interesting way of phrasing it. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't have skin in the game. You could certainly make the argument that there's a class of folks who are the dependents and a class of folks who are the providers. However, even the dependents have a skin in the game, because when the provider's money runs out, everybody's going to be looking for their next meal. So what it really comes down to is the extent to which people are cognizant of the skin they have in the game, and are aware of the fact that their liberties are being eroded. And it's very easy to forget that when you can turn on the TV and watch American Idol, when you can go to the movies, when you can watch a sporting game, when you can play video games. That's my particular vice. There are all kinds of distractions that we've crafted for ourselves to keep us from confronting these issues and really thinking about them. It's not fun to sit around and think about how your liberty's being taken away. And the political mindset of the body politic follows the path of least resistance. There's something about that generation that founded this country that is unique among generations. Most of the time, most people don't take a whole lot of interest in how they are governed. I think we need to take a good look at what circumstances affected the rise of a generation like that, because that's precisely the generation we need to see again.
I agree. I agree with that. Wes, would you comment on that, about why that generation is different than today's generations, or even in the last 100 years?
Well, I would have to say that people have been, from the time they've been in grade school, they've been taught an inaccurate history, I would think. I think that they haven't been taught the complete history of the United States, or the Founding Fathers for that matter, and they've been led away into believing that those were just some people in the past. You don't have to learn from them. I think that we've lost track of our way, and we need to reacclimate ourselves to the past, because those who do not learn from the past are destined to repeat it. And I just find it a shame that we're teaching our young people the wrong things. We need to show them what it used to be, what it means to actually have to fight for your liberty, not in a physical sense, but in a mental sense, in everyday life.
What do you think? He mentioned the education part of that, Sue. What do you have to say about that?
As far as education is concerned, I would say one of the things I think is most profound in my way of thinking is the fact that our schools have gotten away from, not only did they take God out of the schools, but they also have taken the 3 R's out of school and have got a bigger influence on teaching sports and those kind of things. Sports in our country has overtaken our country, and that has now become our God. I believe that is one of the biggest reasons why we are in the condition we are in as a nation, is because our nation has turned away from God. If you contrast our generation even 100 years ago, I think you would see that God was definitely in the schools. God was definitely in our government. Our founding fathers prayed many hours before a meeting, let's say, or during the meeting. But we have gone away from that. And until people wake up and realize that God is our salvation, and if we don't turn to Him now, there is no hope for our country.
I'd like to add to that point on education. I think there are a couple things in play. The first is what I've heard referred to as credentialism, which is this idea that seems to be just taken for granted in our society these days, that in order to do anything, in order to speak authoritatively about anything, you must have a degree in that area. You must be a doctor of whatever it is you're talking about. Otherwise, you're just spewing nonsense. I think we need to fight back against that. I think we need to get back to being jacks of all philosophical trades. I watched a documentary about Thomas Jefferson that was done by Ken Burns for PBS, and that was how they started it out. They started out with this anecdote, perhaps somewhat aggrandized, but talking about how this preacher was standing by the road or walking up a road, and he came across this man who he talked to about politics, and the guy knew everything about politics, and he thought, well, this must be a politician. And he talked to him about religion, and he knew everything. That he was very well versed in religion. He thought, this must be a priest. And he talked to him about business and this topic and that topic, and he just was universally well versed in all these topics. It turned out the guy was Thomas Jefferson. And that's what we need to get back to, having self-taught, learned men, not necessarily credentialed, but learned. I think Glenn Beck is a good example of that. Somebody who just reads books. My own father, he went to vocational school to become an airline mechanic, but in terms of academic knowledge, he was entirely self-taught. Books, videos, watching documentaries, and that's not worthless knowledge. And so I think credentialism is part of the problem. Another thing is the way that we engage in education. These days we're teaching people what to think instead of how to think. And I think the way to get away from that is to go back and embrace classical education, embrace the Socratic dialogue, Socratic method. getting together like this, 4 people in a room, 10 people in a room, 20 people in a room, and talking, debating, asking questions, holding people's feet to the fire, asking them, why do you believe that? What's your rationale? What's your evidence? And in that way, lifting up critical thought, because nowadays it's not valued. What happens to the kid in school who raises his hand and wants to answer the question the teacher just asked? He's the teacher's pet. He's shouted down, whereas the athlete, the jock, is lifted up as this paragon of virtue. We need to reverse those priorities.
Well said. Well said. Let's switch up a little bit. Right now, the government, Minnesota state government and the federal government, is in debt severely. Yet our politicians seem to think we can, I shouldn't say all, but most of them seem to think we can spend our way out. How do we stop this taxing machine? How do we take control of our local governments, state governments, and eventually our federal government?
I think that we do not have a revenue problem in the state of Minnesota. We have a spending problem. And so, for one, we need to reduce the spending. We need to take the way we're spending money and rearrange it so that we are making better use of the money that we do have. Also, I think that as for tax purposes, I've heard a lot of these politicians say that they want to increase taxes on the richest Minnesotans. Well, I'm a firm believer that people should be rewarded for being creative, for being productive, and creating jobs. For one, we need to increase job growth, and I believe that's done through small business, because we know small businesses create jobs. For two, reduce the spending, reallocate it, rearrange it so we're making better use of the money we do have. And I had heard some things about something called a fair tax, where if you go to buy a product, the product may be $100. Your receipt when you paid would say $77 retailer, $23 to the tax. And at that point we could lose our income tax. And it's called a fair tax because of the fact it's fair on what you're buying. You get to choose the amount of tax on what you're buying. And at that point, we also have 500 million visitors to the United States each year. They would also be participating in this fair tax. So it's just something I think we should think about. I'm not saying necessarily that we should institute it, but I think we should discuss it as a way to decrease our debt. Right now we were at $1.8 billion this past legislature for a bonding bill. Next legislative session, it's going to be closer to $5 billion. That price is too high. It's a large number any way you look at it, and it's a huge effort to effectively reduce this, but I think it can be done, as I said, with a reduction in the spending and rearranging it.